Hello, everyone. Welcome to another session with me, Jeff Segal, with Medical Justice, focused on a new topic today, a little bit about me. I'm both an attorney and a physician. I practice as a board certified neurosurgeon for approximately a decade. And for a number of years now, I've been practicing as an attorney, focused mostly, at least initially, on keeping doctors from being sued for frivolous reasons, also focused on internet-based assaults on reputation. And as time has migrated, we have addressed other challenges such as medical board complaints, hospital credentialing issues, national practitioner data bank problems, employer-employee issues, and so on and so forth. I mean, every time I think the list is complete, I am proven wrong. So today, let's talk about ICE, which is Immigration and Custom Enforcement, and what to do. And by the way, this was a topic suggested by the ViewMedi audience as to something they'd like to learn about. It's certainly timely. Do I have to let ICE into my practice if they show up? And so the subtext is what the law says, how HIPAA applies, and what to tell your team if there's a surprise visit by the federal authorities. All right, let's paint the picture here. You have a busy day, and ICE agents show up at your front door. They pull badges out. They say, "We're from ICE." And in this particular case, they're not wearing masks that you can see who they are. And they say, "We're looking for someone." So your question is, do you let them in? I mean, it's obviously very intimidating when somebody shows up with badges and they're from the federal government. And the question is, do you have to let them in? All right. So the first thing you need to understand is, do they have a warrant? Do they have a warrant? So the first and most important warrant, which does give them the ability to dig a little deeper, is a judge-signed warrant called a judicial warrant signed by a judge or a magistrate. And that warrant does grant access legally to specific name locations. So if they pull out this type of document, a judge-signed warrant, you have to comply. But then there's also what is known as that administrative warrant. Administrative warrant is not signed by a judge, meaning that they haven't gone to a judge to make their case that there's a reason to look in your office for a particular individual and a particular spot in your office to find an individual. So if all they have is the administrative warrant and not a judge-signed warrant, that's not sufficient for, we'll call them non-private areas. So what do I mean by that? A non-private area would be an exam room or a place where only staff can be. If they want to be out in the waiting room where the public can can be, then they can stay there. But you can legally deny them entry beyond the public spaces, denying them access to private spaces such as exam rooms in the back. So the big fork in the road is it a judicial warrant? Was it signed by a judge or magistrate? Or was it a warrant that was not signed by a judge or magistrate? If it's the former, signed by a judge, you have to comply, but they're only allowed to search where the warrant describes. If it's not signed by a judge and it's administrative warrant, they cannot go into a private area. They can go into public spaces, but not a private area. So very important distinction. All right, so if they don't have the judge signed warrant, you're not required to give them access beyond the waiting room, and you're not required to disclose any protected health information without a court order. So the rules are in place to the extent that they want to dig a lot deeper. They're going to need to have a judge signing this. Now, look, are there exceptions? Yes, there are exceptions to this. I really don't want to get into this because there are a number of exceptions where you don't need a warrant to um, to chase someone down. So let's say, for example, someone is fleeing on foot, and the ICE agents are chasing them, you know, from block to block, and then they jump into your office, and they jump into an exam room. They start hiding. Well, that arguably is not what we're talking about here. That would probably be an exception, and they could probably continue their their pursuit of this individual. But that person's probably not one of your patients anyway. He probably just found an open door and ended up crashing through the front desk, ending up in a room, or potentially with another patient back there. But for the most part, judge has to sign it if they're going to go to private spaces. Does HIPAA still apply? Yes, HIPAA still applies. ICE is governed by federal law, and HIPAA does not override. I'm sorry, ICE does not override HIPAA, which is also a federal law. So again, without a court order, a warrant, or other HIPAA permitted exceptions, you cannot release protected health information. That is a no-no. All right, so you can disclose protected health information without patient authorization if there's a court order, court-ordered warrant, a subpoena, administrative request. Again, it's going to be signed by a judge or magistrate. And there are times they do it to, at least in HIPAA, it basically says to identify or locate a suspect, a fugitive, a material witness, or missing person in response to request about a victim or suspected victim of a crime. This is an exception under HIPAA. It's called the law enforcement exception. So for the most part, you got to follow HIPAA, but HIPAA does have various exceptions where you do not need the patient's signed authorization to disclose protected health information. And here is the law enforcement exception. And, the main part of this exception is that there's a court order. A judge has signed it. So I'm not really telling you anything that you didn't know from several slides ago. It's just that this is embedded into the HIPAA law as an exception. There's another HIPAA law enforcement exception, arguably not relevant to ICE showing up at your door, but just to be complete, it's to alert law enforcement of a person's death if criminal activity is suspected. So if protected health information is evidence of a crime that occurred in your office, for example, or in a hospital's premises, then yes, you do fall under the HIPAA law enforcement exception. Again, this has very little to do with ICE showing up at your office, or if there's a medical emergency offsite and it's necessary to inform law enforcement about the crime, the victims, the perpetrator, etc., then you don't need the patient signed authorization or the individual signed authorization to disclose this. Again, not relevant to the initial topic, which is ICE shows up in your office. What can you do? How does HIPAA apply? This prong of the law enforcement exception entirely irrelevant to the conversation about ICE. All right. So if HIPAA makes an exception for law enforcement officials, who's included in that bucket? Is ICE included in that bucket? And it's broad. It includes government officers or employees who investigate or prosecute violations of law. Let me repeat that. It's broad and includes government officers or employees who investigate or prosecute violations of law. Sheriff's deputies, police investigators, FBI, state officials, and arguably ICE. I mean, this is a giant bucket here related to law enforcement officials. All right, now is the time to educate your staff, because if you're in the back or if you're off-site and ICE shows up, they should know what to do. So let them know up front what are the things they expect if law enforcement arrives. Don't go crazy. Stay calm. First thing, ask for identification. Make sure they are who they say they are, and make sure they present the appropriate documentation. If they're looking to get into a protected space or looking for protected health information, they need a warrant to do so. And you need to make sure it was signed by a judge, a judicial warrant, not an administrative warrant. Because without a judicial warrant, you can legally deny access to the non-public areas. And now would be a time, if that happens, you pick up the phone and call an attorney to say, hey, ICE is at the front desk. What should I do? But all of this should have been prepped in advance of ICE showing up or any other law enforcement official. But it's always good to have legal counsel online so they could pick up the phone and prevent you from freaking out any further, any more than you have to. All right. So what happens if you do refuse entry? If you refuse entry to the non-public areas, you just want to make sure that you didn't violate the law. And what is violate the law? You don't want to get caught up with an allegation against you that you're harboring some type of fugitive. So the big no-go is, do they have a judicial warrant, a judge-signed warrant, or not? And you may refuse entry to the non-public areas, and they cannot go after you for harboring a fugitive if there's no judge-signed warrant. So it's got to be signed by a judge. Um, but again, just make sure that you have an attorney who picks up the phone. Just make sure you dot your I's and cross the T's here. So just remember, you are not an immigration agent. Your duty is to your patients. You took the Hippocratic Oath. You also have a medical license. Your duty is to follow the law. And one of the aspects of law as a physician is that you have to protect patient privacy, and you should have clear protocols in place. Make sure your staff understands what a warrant is, what a judge-signed warrant is, so that they don't just um, open up, give everyone the keys when a badge is shown. Everybody's got to follow the proper protocols. And honestly, if you deliver protected health information when you weren't allowed to or you weren't supposed to, you may end up running into a problem. So it's not just, are you at risk for harboring a fugitive? The other risk on the other side is that you relinquishing or giving up protected health information without the authorization to do so. So you can get burned on both sides, but it's easy to follow the law on both sides here. So, quick reference, what you do, someone shows up at the front door. First thing, they identify themselves as an ICE agent or an officer. You go, great, can I see your identification and your warrant? I want to see both the identification and the warrant. And if they don't have a warrant, you could say that I can put you into the public area. That's fine. But for non-public areas, you need to have a warrant signed by a judge. And then the next part of the script is, we're going to contact our attorney immediately. Please wait. This script works pretty well, which is get their identification, look for the warrant, give the statement. If they don't have a judicial warrant signed by a judge, saying this is our policy for non-public areas, our policy is that you need a judicial warrant signed by a judge. You don't have that here, but nonetheless, we will contact our attorney. Wait around. I'll get back to you shortly. Pretty decent script. And that is that. That is what we do with ICE in this day of age. And I'm sure this is uh, a bit of law that will continue to change over time. If you'd like to ask us questions, feel free to email at info@medicaljustice.com. Again, info@medicaljustice.com. You can click on the QR code, the bottom right hand of your screen. It will take you to our website. You can even schedule an appointment to chat with us for 15 to 20 minutes about your medical legal challenge. So in short, we've been at this for about 20 plus years, handling frivolous lawsuits, all types of medical legal complaints. We deal with online reputational problems, National Practitioner Data Bank, guiding doctors with notices of intent to sue, employment and exit agreements. The list goes on and on. And so I don't have to be exhaustive with the type of list that I have. Just click on the QR code on the bottom right hand of the screen, and you can schedule a 15 to 20-minute consultation at no charge to go over your particular issue. All right. Again, this is that fancy QR code. Alternatively, you can go to medicaljustice.com/schedule. Again, medicaljustice.com/schedule. Thanks for your attention. Until we meet again.